What's up, everyone? It's Spencer here from Scoped Exposure.
And Jessa from Damage Control, and together we make the host of Through Our Lens podcast.
And we are putting together the Scoped 5-year fest that's happening here in Calgary.
This fest is happening August 26th and 27th in the city of Calgary, Alberta, Canada.
We got a ton of great bands who are playing. We got a bit of a California takeover with Strife, Tsunami, and Scowl.
We've also got IM joining us from Texas, along with Ballista. We've got Karma from Chicago, Change from the Northwest, and a ton of other great supporting acts. Tickets can be bought at www.damagecontrol.store. We've got weekend passes as well as single-day offerings up there now.
You can also find the ticket link in the description of this podcast as well as either of our socials. This is something we've worked on for a long, long time. Get your tickets now, and we'll see you there.
This is a big issue among many bands, is having a consistent drummer.
Yes.
Having somebody who can hold that shit down.
Yeah, we're on the same wavelength. I think Endgame's had 4 drummers at this point.
Yeah, we've had, I think Matt is our 3rd or 4th, I think. So, drummers, I love you. You are needed.
I had the best stage dive of my life tonight, and you're trying to tell me you don't know if you got it.
Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. This is another episode of the Scoped Exposure podcast. Very, very excited to be welcoming on a good friend, someone who I don't think knows that their work and their creative pursuits have really inspired me and just the whole gambit of Scoped Exposure in general. Rick from RUST is here on the show today. Thank you for joining me, my friend.
Absolutely, man. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Just a little bit of a precursor and a little, giving Rick some roses before we get started here. Rick was someone that I've gotten the pleasure of knowing through your band, but even prior to that, Rick was doing a lot of documentation through photos in the Southern Ontario area, and I think just the style of his work and your consistency with everything, like, just really, I think, was a very pivotal seed in just my overall outlook and execution when it came to starting Scoped Exposure. So I don't think I've ever mentioned that to you, but I wanted to say that at the very top of the episode, as I've been a big fan of yours, and yeah, I'm just really excited to be chatting with you today.
I'm excited too. Yeah, that's yeah, I don't even know what to say. That's cool. That's really
Dude,
cool,
when CaptureTheCore popped up on my timeline, I'd be like, let's go, So
yep.
No, it's I didn't mean to catch you off guard with the
not at all,
sentimentals
man.
there.
Not at all, man. Yeah, I appreciate that. I appreciate all of that.
Yeah,
really
and I'm sure
cool.
that's something that we're going to chat a little bit more as we get into the episode. But maybe for the folks that don't know who you are, do you want to just give an intro about who you are, where you're based, and how you're known as far as hardcore goes?
Absolutely. So my name is Rick. I play guitar in a band called RUST. Prior to RUST, I kind of got my start in like the Ontario Canada hardcore scene via like documentation, like Spencer said. I spent a good few years grinding pretty hard. So I think CaptureTheCore was kind of where I got all my start. I'm primarily based out of Ontario.
Yeah, and definitely, with new RUST materials like starting to make its way into the universe. Tommy's been on the show before, but I definitely wanted to give you guys a little bit of a bump through the podcast, and I think you and I chatting has been something I've wanted to do for a long time now. So, but before we get into all the music chats, we got to check some bevs, obviously, before the show begins officially. So tell the folks at home what you're going to be sipping on for your side of this podcast?
All right. So today I got a Starbucks drink. This is a iced peach green tea lemonade. It's pretty good. The only thing I might say about it is that the peach overpowers everything. So if you're going for a green tea flavor, you're not going to get it. It's all peach.
It's all peach. Yeah.
Yep.
That peach definitely is one of those flavors where it's like it could really steal the show for sure.
Oh yeah, definitely. But it's good. I kind of got it by mistake.
By mistake? What do you mean by mistake?
So like a couple weeks ago, like my daughter, she likes these like cake pops that they have. So she's like, can we go to Starbucks for a cake pop? And I was like, well, I kind of don't want to drive all the way to Starbucks just for a cake pop. So I was like, like maybe I'll get a beverage. I'll see what they got. And I saw they were like advertising it, and I got one, and I was just hooked.
Yeah. Yeah, it's always sometimes it like the seasonal drinks actually do like slap, and sometimes it's like whose idea was this,
Right.
But yeah, sounds very healthy. For me, I'm drinking my kind of like second coffee of the day. I hit up a coffee spot just to get an iced Americano. And
Nice.
I don't know if you feel this way. Like sometimes when you're like, I'm going in to get this, sometimes you're comfortable enough where you're like, yeah, like, can I also add a pastry or something? But sometimes you feel like either the person taking your order is like a little like, stressed out or like having a bad day. So you just make it like super easy. So I kind of like ordered an iced Americano without him asking, do I want anything in it? And I'm like, I'll just add something in it when I get home. So I kind of transferred it into this mason jar. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like that's maybe a generational thing where it's like, it's fine. I can just deal with it as a human being versus like, excuse me, you didn't ask me about this.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. I feel you. Yeah, I feel you.
Yeah. Well, Rick, really excited to do this podcast with you, my friend.
Absolutely.
So, Rick, I'm sure you've listened to, one or two of these before, but any new guests that I have here on the show, I always like to get a bit of context about how they got into this whole, subculture that we're in, hardcore, punk, however you want to spin it. So tell me about like the very first time that you were kind of exposed to this whole thing, and then we can kind of build it up from there.
For sure. So I first got into, I guess, I got exposed to hardcore at a very, very early age. I grew up in a household, my dad loved 80s hair metal. Like he loved Motley Crue and he loved all those kind of bands. And Much Music at the time, they had something called the Pepsi Power Hour. And that ended up turning into a show called Loud. Do you remember Loud?
I do remember Loud. Yeah.
Yeah. So Loud,
Pepsi
every Friday
Power
at midnight.
Hour might have been before my time, but
yeah, oh yeah,
I love the
definitely.
alliteration there.
Yeah. So yeah, like Friday at midnight, Loud would come on, and I think at that time when I was watching it, it was around like maybe 97 ish. So like I caught bands like Machine Head, even like Coal Chamber, Fear Factory, and then one day they played Hatebreed before Dishonor. And I saw that video and I was just like, holy shit, this is so sick. And I think, I think that was probably like my first introduction into hardcore.
Was that video?
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. So, because there's been a lot of people that have come on the podcast that either had parents who like weren't really like into any kind of heavier music, and some that were, and it seems like you're in the family of having at least some exposure to like a flying V guitar wouldn't like break your brain, if that makes sense.
No, not at all.
Yeah. So I guess like was your dad and parents in general just like really like did they try to like squeeze that in raising you, or they're like, if Rick finds it, he finds it, and we'll leave it at that?
So So interesting. My mom was all about country music. She's the biggest country fan ever. She's from Quebec, so she liked all that francophone French country stuff.
Sure. Yeah.
And like I'm originally from Alberta, so growing up I lived in Alberta. So she brought that kind of music with her over to Alberta.
Yeah.
And so we heard a lot of her music, and then my dad was, his music kind of like trumped all of it because like he's just he's someone who's just very passionate about the music he listened to. Like, you hop in his truck and he had like one of those like 10 disc CD changers, and it was all like Motley Crue, Kiss, Alice Cooper, and then he randomly started listening to Metallica, and then so
yeah. So you were exposed to a lot of like staple heavy music as far as your dad's generation is concerned, but your mom was also like very in tune with just like music and the writing was on the wall for you to be passionate about music, it seems like.
100%. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I did not know that you were originally from Alberta. So like when was the shift from I guess growing up from Alberta to Ontario, I'm guessing is the next stop for you?
So I was born in a town called Innisfail, Alberta.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
It's
drive past there all the time.
Okay. Yeah. It's near Red Deer.
Mm-hmm.
So I was born there, and then we moved to Red Deer, and then I kind of grew up in Red Deer. And then the transfer from Alberta it went to Quebec, actually. I moved to Quebec first.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And so my parents got divorced, and then we just kind of went with her side of the family kind of deal.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's where, I went to high school and kind of grew up there. And
so born in Alberta, kind of got raised in Alberta and Quebec. So is there another stop before we hit Ontario, or was that the next in line?
So Ontario was the next in line.
Uh-huh.
Like out of high school, like I lived in a town that didn't have a whole lot going on. It's like one of those towns where, employment, there's almost none.
Sure.
And, there's, I think it's maybe 5,000 people live there. And, there was like a tiny strip mall, there was like a McDonald's, and anybody who had jobs at those places would never give them up. So you didn't have a whole lot of hope as far as work and kind of succeeding, I guess you could say.
Mm-hmm.
So I have family who are in like the telecommunications industry kind of in Ontario, and I got my foot in the door for a job opportunity there, and that was kind of the shift. I moved to Ontario and managed to get a decent job and start making my way.
Gotcha. So I think an interesting thing in your story, and like you and I have chatted many a times, but like I've never gotten to, this is why this is a huge selfish reason of doing this podcast, is like I can really break down someone's like, why behind how they came into where they are.
Mm-hmm.
So in the midst of all of that, you're growing up in Innisfail, which is, for the American listeners, this tiny ass town just outside of Red Deer, which is already like a small city in Alberta. And then you're moving to this place that, like you said, like there's maybe a McDonald's or there's something. So like, was your drive to like learn more since watching this like Hatebreed, video, like I find that either you're coming from a town where you're like, I need to just like get my hands on anything that I can, because like it's out of desperation off of the lack of options to do stuff. So is that your story, or is there more to that I'm missing?
That is, you almost nailed that right on the head. Yeah. When I was in high school in Quebec, I wanted to start a band so bad. And I managed to find a couple friends who went to the same school as me. And we just kind of picked up instruments kind of thing. Like I didn't really play guitar too much. I just kind of like noodled around on like an acoustic guitar that like my grandparents had and that kind of stuff. And then the the singer of our band, his dad had like a whole like little jam spot.
Mhm.
So he had like a drum kit, he had amps, and just kind of he let us kind of go in there and just kind of have free reign and do what we wanted. And all we did was basically try and do throwdown covers. It was like throwdown, you know, like there's a band we love called Full Blown Chaos.
Okay.
They're like they're a New York hardcore band from the early 2000s. We love that band. So all we did was try to cover like just kind of the hardest shit at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And
so, no, you keep going. I'm cutting you off there.
yeah, and yeah, so we kind of started like our first little band, and like everyone thought we were just terrible. It was all just like open,
Yeah.
And yeah, so I think like I ended up moving, and that kind of fell to the wayside, and then coming to Ontario, I through working and stuff, and I was like, you know what, like I started to get that fire burning again to like want to play an instrument and kind of get back into the game.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, like through documenting and stuff, it really ignited like this big passion in me, like to be a musician.
Yeah.
And yeah, that was definitely what happened.
Yeah, cool. So I think I want to hit on some of the documenting and the photography stuff first before we actually get to like Rust starting and some of the more current things that are happening.
Yep.
So you move to Ontario and you're like, I want to get involved, and maybe it's you're just starting to meet people. Was photography always something that you maybe had in your back pocket, or were you learning how to like actually take photos by going to these shows with a camera? Like, which kind of came first?
So in high school, I kind of noodled around with the camera a little bit. I always had kind of like a little passion for photography. I used to like taking portraits of people, and portraits of like pets and animals and wildlife and that kind of stuff. And so yeah, I always kind of had that that want to get a decent camera and kind of really explore like what you can do.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what started me wanting to do band photography, I think it was in 2014, I think, or 2013. I saw someone wearing like an Integrity shirt, and there was a photo on the back of them. I think it's from Warped Tour back in the day, and like they're all jumping on the stage, and I was like, that's the coolest thing I've ever seen. And I was like, it'd be really cool to take that kind of photo,
Mm.
And yeah, and that just kind of sparked the want to start going to more shows. And like I'm going to dial back a bit. Like when I moved to Ontario, I didn't really go to shows much. I didn't really know much about the local kind of community and that kind of stuff. It's always kind of nerve wracking getting your foot in there, right? You go to your first local show and you're like, this is kind of crazy because I don't know anybody, and like I want to you want to talk to people, and then you just kind of hope you talk to like one person that will lead you into into the the scene.
Yeah, totally. I think speaking as someone who's, I guess, like a Calgary hardcore transplant, if you want to call it that. Like I grew up in Winnipeg. I got into the local scene there, and I think a good way of maybe skipping a lot of those like hesitancies of like of moving to a city where you have no friends, and there's a hardcore scene, and you might know one of the local bands, but you don't know what, like the community and like the people that make up that that area. I think something that helps is obviously if you're going to a fest that happens there, a couple local shows, and so when we moved to Calgary, like a huge reason for that, it was like, yeah, I have friends here. I like the Calgary hardcore scene is popping, and then like it was a lot more seamless of a transition. But I have definitely been at shows just like super randomly throughout the world where it's like I don't know anyone here, and and it could either be like I'm just filming for Scoped or I'm just purely in attendance. I remember when I remember I was down in the States for work, and Rotting Out was playing a show randomly that I was like, I think I can jump away from work and, my day is wrapped up and I'm going to go and check out this show. And, this is, only a year or so ago, or I'm getting my timelines mixed up. It was earlier this year, and I got to run into like I definitely was like I don't know half of the cats here, but I definitely got to run into like people that were based there. They're like, "What the fuck are you doing here from all the way from Canada? Like,
Right? Yeah.
did you come
Yeah.
for the show?" I'm like, "No, no, no, I'm just here for work." So, I think that does. I think in time you do build up a confidence to be able to like if I'm just down in the area, I could just like go to a show and I might know one of the local bands, and that goes a long way. But in the
Definitely.
initial stages, it's like, yeah, it's daunting where it's like, am I going to annoy
Hmm.
someone if I'm just like, hey, I'm not from here or whatever. So,
Yeah.
yeah, it's I always try to make an effort when I don't know someone and I can clearly tell they haven't come to the show with anyone, just to like to go and chat with them for a couple minutes, because you never know. It could be someone who goes and changes the hardcore world forever.
Absolutely. And, it could be that extreme, or it could be on the other end where it just deters them from going, ever again. Right.
Right. Yeah. It was like, well, at least Rick came up and chatted with me, so I can go to this next show and hopefully he'll be there.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh yeah.
So you were saying like, yeah, you had this like subtle passion for photography, and you saw this cool like you saw the shot on the shirt that like that
Yes.
made you be like, I want to be able to do and take that kind of photo. Um,
Exactly.
so I think what the reason I wanted to have you on and talk to you about it is because again, you were someone that like initially I was like just eating your shit up like it was candy. Like anytime you would post cool like sets from shows that like you would probably argue were like, oh, they were just like a local show here. But for me, it was just like seeing it through your lens was like so cool to be able to see all these bands and like the warping of like the fisheye lens and some so there's that, but there's also the fact that like you don't do that anymore. And I
Yep.
guess what was the point of like, because someone who does do archiving of any kind,
Yep.
you start to get into a little bit of like there's the expectation cycle from people and bands like I'm
Sure.
sure I'm sure you've seen that TikTok where it's like the guy standing outside of someone's car. They're like, so when are you going to post the photos? And they're like,
Yeah.
oh, in a couple weeks. It's like, no, I need a new profile picture now. So I guess like I want to make sure that we don't skip over any of this, but like, at what
Yeah.
point did you feel like it was an expectation for you to take photos at a show versus like, oh, like I like doing this?
Um, I'd say probably like I really started going at it probably 2015. And I'd say probably like 2 years in, 3 years in, I was like, that's kind of when it started to feel that way.
Mhm.
Um, I I kind of stopped. There's a few reasons why. One of them is kind of at the time, I had a second child on the way. So I had another kid coming, and then my time just kind of was spread so thin between having to stay at home to help take care of, wife and other child and that kind of stuff. And then going to shows became a bit more harder during that time.
Mhm.
And that's when like the expectation side started to ramp up because for some reason, like there felt like much more of a demand kind of thing.
Mhm.
And just, I wasn't able to give kind of deal. And yeah, it just, I had to kind of put my mental health kind of, you know, um, at the forefront and just, you know, do the stuff in my normal life. And then kind of through that, through taking the time off and, like I still went to shows here and there and that kind of deal. Um, and then through that, I think, yeah, like the demand just kept going. Like I'd get, 5, 10 messages from different bands being like, hey, we have a show. Can you make it? and you hate being the dick. That's like, I actually can't. I'm so sorry, but like I was always kind of the guy that was like, if I can't make it, I'll recommend someone who I think is equally, whose work is awesome too.
Right.
So at least, if I'm like, I'm not totally leaving them hanging, there's an option there too.
Right. Yeah. I think something that is just interesting to me because it's like I definitely think that, when I was getting into it, I was like, man, Rick is like one of the best photographers in Canada. I thought your stuff was like so consistent. Stop shaking your head. This is what I think. It was like so consistent, and it's just like, I think that, there's something to be said about just different styles, whether you're shooting with like a telephoto lens or things like that. But I think hardcore is just known for that like fisheye, like skateboard s style of like having the distortion. Like all those things are like bread and butter when it comes to our genre
Oh
of
yeah.
music.
Yeah,
So
just checking the boxes off.
yeah, totally. So, there's definitely like, the local homie, Cole Hadley, who, when I moved to Calgary, him
Love
and I were
him.
like amazing human being. But him and I even have the conversation where he is getting busier and busier with like printing shirts and doing all that stuff, where he's like, like, unless like, I don't know, like certain times where like we played a show where he showed up without a camera, and I was like, "Oh, you're not taking photos?" And he's like, "Nah, I'm taking that off." And there was other people taking photos, but I have. It's just that interesting thing where like, your shit is like so good that people are like, they need it. They're like, I need those Rick shots, I need those Cole shots, whatever it is. I need Spencer to
Mhm.
like to film the bands.
Yep.
But there becomes like a weird distorting, or there's a weird expectation where it's like, oh, this is not even, I'm not viewing this as I'm not viewing this entity as a person that has a life, that has like like responsibilities and things outside of this whole world. So like,
Yep.
I struggle with that on a very daily basis when it comes to like the expectations that I have for scope, but also that people have put on me for what I do.
Definitely.
So yeah, it is a weird balance, and like, did you feel? And I don't know if you've like officially like hung it up as far as like not taking photos, but yeah, like where's the line of like you setting the boundaries for yourself of like, I will do this when X is in play, if that makes sense.
Like, you mean like as far as like maybe setting a timeline out? Is that kind of what you mean?
Not a timeline, but just
Or just kind
like,
of how much grace you can give yourself? Is that what you mean?
yeah, grace, and also like, I'm only gonna take, I'll shout out Sean from In Your Face Films. Like him and I have chatted about, because he was like, I'm just gonna take a break from filming and go to shows. And I remember when Endgame was playing with you guys at the Kill Room in Hamilton, he was like, hey, I will film your set if that's something that helps you out and wants to do. And that meant so much to me because again, he's not someone that does it actively anymore, but like, it does help me out. So again, this is a very
Definitely.
long-winded way of me being like, how have you set the boundaries for yourself of like, I will do this if these, if things like, how, when do you feel right taking photos now?
So kind of like the way I kind of look at it is like, I'll sometimes maybe bring my camera to a show, obviously, a show that Russ plays or something. I'll bring my camera sometimes and just kind of have it there just in case. I don't know. I've just been kind of like, kind of free with the idea, maybe if it's a band that like I love that are rolling through, and, you know, that kind of thing. If it's a band that I haven't shot, then, I'll absolutely, I'll go for it. Um, but yeah, I think one interesting thing too is kind of when I kind of stopped doing it, I noticed a lot more people coming on. So like a lot more photographers kind of entering the scene, and kind of, you start noticing, instead of maybe 1, 2 photographers at a show, you're seeing like, okay, there's like 4, and then there's like maybe 5, and then like you're at the point where even today, like you're seeing 9, 10 at a show, and you're like, holy shit, like I can't even like, like you can't have like any proper photo etiquette at all when there's that many people there, because you're either constantly in someone else's shot, you're either thinking you're annoying the band, or
Yeah.
it's busy.
Yeah. I do think yeah, that's an interesting point. Maybe when you were like, hey, I'm gonna like pump the brakes a little bit, like did you have this like, did you feel guilty or like feel any like, oh well, if I stop, no one is gonna, fill my shoes essentially? Like, did you feel that?
Yeah, I did. I absolutely did. I felt that way a little bit for sure.
Mhm.
And and then I got to know a few different people. I got to meet Omar. Omar's like, the first conversation we had, we went to a random show, and he's like, what are you shooting on? And I was like, yeah, a Canon, whatever. And I'm like, yo, do you have an Instagram? I was like, yeah, absolutely. So I showed him my phone, and he's like, holy shit. He's like, well, he said, I wanted to meet you forever. I was like, what?
Yeah.
So yeah, like, meeting Omar, and then, seeing his style and all that kind of stuff, and seeing how active he was getting, I felt really good about pumping the brakes a bit,
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely think that's, again, something I think about all the time. It's like, well, if I stop filming bands for Scoped, or and sometimes I think very like black and white when it comes to different things. It's like I'm either doing Scoped all the time or none at all. And then, there's people in my life that are like, yo, you could just do local stuff for a year and that's totally cool. Like I'm way too critical of myself when it comes to those things.
Of course.
But I do think that I'm like, okay, would anyone do this if I stopped? And you start to play in this like, not like a savior complex, but you're just like, oh, maybe sometimes it actually is stepping out and like making the gap, and then other people will just come. And I
For
totally
sure.
agree with you. Like I had a conversation once with someone who's based in California, and they were saying like, yeah, if I go to a program show with my camera, there's already like 4 or 5 people there, and that show is not built to have that many photographers. So it's like, hey, I'm just gonna take
Yeah.
a step back and just hang out for the night and allow these people to do it. I've already shot all of these bands already, so let's give the youngins a chance to do it as well.
Oh yeah.
I think when it comes to like the bands that you have shot, it was just like a couple days ago, you were posting that like your photo was getting used for stuff. So like even though you
Yep.
haven't like taken photos in like on a consistent basis in a while, like do you see your work still like showing up on t-shirts, getting posted and flyers and all that?
Absolutely. Yeah. That stuff happens all the time. Um, you know, it's, that's kind of one of the cool things, is that you're, taking photos, your work kind of lives on through different means.
Mm-hmm.
Like every now and again, like I'll get a surprise where like, Roger Meeret from Agnostic Front will send me an email and be like, hey, like I'm not too good with emails, I'm kind of shit at this, but, is it okay if I use one of your photos that you took, at the show? And absolutely,
Right.
and, like I'll get little surprises like that, or like um, I'll see someone wearing a shirt, like, one of them was like a Trail of Lies shirt. Like Triple B did, like, I guess it might've been a pre-order for the Limitless, 7-inch they did.
Hmm.
And, I saw someone randomly wearing a Trail of Lies shirt that I hadn't seen. And like my photo was like kind of on the chest part of it.
Yeah.
I was like, that's cool.
Yeah. Yeah. It is cool to have like, sometimes I think about like whenever I decide to either again, this is me thinking black and white, but if I was ever to hang up scope, sometimes I'm like, oh, I would have one day on social media where everyone would say stuff and then they would just move on. And largely that is the case with anything, like, a business goes under, or like a band breaks up, or like something happens and people will have a day and then that will happen. But
Yeah.
realistically, there are different little trickle down moments like years later where people will be resharing, the stuff that you put out into the world. And that's really, really cool.
Yep.
Um, have you ever seen a photo of yours used for a piece of merch that you were like, why'd you use this photo and not the better one that I know is in that set? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So interestingly enough, I haven't really had that happen. Um, but I had a situation once. This is kind of on the same topic, but a little bit not. Um, I got an email from Franz from Attila,
Okay.
and like if you know Attila, you know Franz, you know exactly how he is, all that kind of, you know. But so um, Attila, if you've ever seen Attila merch, you kind of know they don't use live photos on their merch much.
Mm-hmm.
They stick to designs. They stick to um, like brands and like that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
So I guess it might have been probably one of the first live photos that they decided to do. I got an email from Franz. They had played a show at Hard Luck. You've been to Hard Luck, right?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I guess Endgame did the Toys for Tots there.
Yeah.
So Attila did 4 nights at Hard Luck back to back for some random reason.
Back to back. That's too many shows.
It was the weirdest shit ever. Yeah.
Respectfully,
like 4
that's four. Wow. Okay. Like, I'm like, is Attila that big to play 4 Toronto shows? That's like a
weird.
long weekend. That's great.
Absolutely.
Okay, sorry. I got a little sidetracked there.
Yeah, so they did 4 shows, and I managed to get into one of them. They were all sold out and stuff, and I managed to get into one, and I got permission to take photos. And the one thing that I'm gonna like spiderweb here, but
No,
the one
please.
thing that I noticed with a lot of like bigger bands is they don't like the flash, but the thing is that the product that the flash can make, they absolutely love that shit.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
In the moment, it's not preferred, but the end result is always better.
Absolutely, yeah. And
Yes.
like I've had that conversation with many people. So Attila is one of those bands, they hate flash photography. Like absolutely hate it. So I snapped this photo of Franz. It's him doing like this mic grab shit. And immediately, I got a stare from him like, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "Okay, I'll back off."
Yeah.
but like that ended up being the photo he wanted. Like he's like, "Yeah, I think this is a cool." Yeah. So I was like, "Okay, and so it's kind of weird."
Yeah, I find that I do agree that the bigger the bands that, people are trying to shoot, like I feel like it becomes very obvious the gatekeeping that gets put in place for that. So it's like,
Definitely.
do you have a photo pass? You can only shoot the first 3, songs, and then
first 3 songs. Yeah,
that's an industry standard. Anytime I've heard that, I'm like, that is the wackiest shit I've ever heard. And as someone who
shitty.
films, like there was times where I would like be filming a band and they would be like, they know who I am. I'm friends with them. They're like, yeah, we want you to film our whole set. And they play like an hour-long set, which is like a little outside the norm of what I would do, but they're asking me. So I'm like, yeah, I'll go and do that. I remember I was filming my friends they're in a pop punk band called Calling All Captains. And I was in
New Damage.
I was just on New Damage. So I was just like filming their show, and then like maybe 15 minutes in, I get a tap on the shoulder, and it was like, "Oh, the 3 songs is up." And I like talked with Nick, their bass player, and I was like, I spoke with him before. I'm like, am I gonna get like some weird thing? He's like, "No, you just do your thing. Like you are here for like on behalf of us. We wanted you to be here." And I was like, it's always that weird thing when you're at a live show too, because you're just screaming at each other because there's music playing. And I'm like, no, they asked me to film the whole set, and he's like, oh, okay. And then I watched all the photographers kind of fuck off, and I'm just like, I looked up at Nick, and he was just nodding at me like it's all good. Um, so yeah, there's just all these strange circumstances where you're trying to take photos of a band of like of a Alexis on Fire level, but it's like there's all these hurdles when bands still want that shit. Like they want to
Yep.
have photos to post the next day to be like, yo, Calgary was amazing, Toronto was amazing, so and so date is next.
Yep.
And it's just wild that like venues are so particular about that.
Yeah. It's
And I
very much
understand
venue based.
it is very much venue based. There are specific bands that are like that have those preferences, like you said, Attila. But I think it might just be. I think it really falls on the venues. Sorry, I'm just kind of going on a tangent a little bit here, Rick. But
Yeah. There's so much to talk about.
oh, dude, yeah, you're opening up the can of worms. Earlier this year, I went to go film a show where majority of the bands that I had already filmed before, and then the headliner band apparently had a like didn't like the tour manager didn't like that I was filming them without their permission, and like I went up to get my audio recorder and he was ringing me out, and it was this whole thing. And as an archivist, I got really upset about it and like posted it on the internet the next day. Not like tagging the band, just being like, this was my experience. And,
Yep.
I had some people that were on my side, and then some people were like, like it doesn't matter if you filmed the band or not. So there was like some feedback that I got. I'm like, yeah, you are right. But what happened is I ended up reaching out to the band to apologize, to be like, hey, like, I'm not going to post your set. And they're like, you know what? Like our tour manager, he was totally out of line doing that. Like you could post the set if you want. And so again, it's like this weird thing of like, I, I I get that people are trying just to do their job, and like the tour
Yeah.
manager is just trying to make sure the band is comfortable and there's not like some weird person. But the thing is, I just from where I was, I'm like, I'm not affecting anyone. I'm not like it like, I don't like the flash maybe creates a little bit of a weird thing, but like you said,
Yeah.
it obviously yields the best product. I've definitely gotten photos from photographers that don't use flash. I'm like, this, you can only bump up your ISO so much.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
But again, it like I'm just off of this tangent. It's just there's I find between bands and promoters and venues, there's like this weird thing where it's like this subculture. A lot of people, I think, get into it because they see the videos, they see the photos, they like, and it's like capturing the energy that happens at a show and you're putting it out. Like
100%. Yep.
I remember when Sonny was on the podcast, I like made some notion, like, I don't know, this might be a hot take, but it's like without the content or the media of like hardcore and alternative music, like like it would just be posters and band logos, like
Yep.
a lot of
For
people.
sure.
I've checked out bands just because I've seen a cool shot of them.
Yep. I have too, many times.
Mm-hmm.
That's actually how I got into, I Am. Like I Am's one band that I saw a really cool photo and I was like, and their logo's sick. I was like, all right, I'll check it out.
Yeah. I think it's just I don't know what the answer is per se, but I just think there needs to be more communication between people that are there at the show doing that and just like the the bands and the promoters. It's just wild to see people go off on different power trips and make people feel small just because of a particular preference.
Yeah, for sure.
I definitely believe that like most DIY, and maybe Attila is just maybe a step above that, but like most alternative stuff, it's like kind of Wild West, right? You got people
Definitely.
that are coming in and moshing like animals, and no one is being like, oh, well, our venue rules as far as you can only mosh for the first three. It's just such a for people to set up these boundaries when it's like, can we all just be responsible of one another to make sure that we're not being overbearing here, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Yeah. I agree with you. There's been a few times where actually one interesting thing is when you take a band who comes from that that DIY kind of huge flash photography, fisheye shots, and like they come from that kind of thing, and then on like this side of it, like where they currently are in their career or whatever, they're just like, nope. They look at you like you're a piece of shit.
Right.
Like that's always kind of like an interesting thing. And then it's also interesting when there's a band that started off DIY and they just stay that way. Like that's cool. Like I like that stuff. Like one band that does that quite a lot is Unearth, believe it or not. Like Unearth is they're one of those bands that like they want you in their face taking photos and just, you know what I mean?
Right.
Like one of the last, I guess you could say, like big shows that I shot Unearth in Darkest Hour at a hot dog bar in Barrie, Ontario.
Damn, that's a cut.
50 cap. There's like 50 cap like in that room.
Right.
And I managed to get in there. Like I got in through Darkest Hour actually, and then getting to talk with the Unearth guys, and it ended up being a thing where every single photo that I took between both bands ended up getting used for something really cool. Right. Like Darkest Hour sent me like a 7-inch with like a collage of like all my photos. Unearth is using my shit for shirts and all that stuff, and I'm like, that's so cool.
Right. And this is a very, sometimes these kind of topics come up on the podcast and I know that I could talk about it for 3 hours, and we're talking about it in like a smaller condensed amount of time for just a one-on-one interview. But I do think it's a larger conversation of like, yes, there are circumstances where bands are like so big that like, as far as like a photo area, like there needs to be people who are serious about doing that to like do different steps to get that level of access. But man, if you're at a like a whatever kind of venue and like these bands like, and there's no, I feel like an indicator for me is like if there's no security of like people that are like, don't get on the stage, most things are free reign. Like,
that was my rule too. Absolutely.
Yeah. Unearth being just down for the core is something I did not expect. But that is very, very, very cool. Maybe one of the last things that I can ask you just around this topic is like, you seem pretty open for anyone to use your stuff for whatever means. But I know that a lot of photographers get in a very like, oh, you're using my stuff without my permission. And it becomes like a conversation of like, know your worth and all this. Like, where do you land on that whole gamut of things?
So I've always been cool with bands using my stuff for whatever. Most people have been super respectful. Mm-hmm. They'll send me an email or they'll shoot me a message and be like, hey, and like some will offer money, like for me, it's about getting, that stuff kind of out in the universe. Like as far as money goes, like, it wasn't really a big deal for me. I know for a lot of people it is because, they want a career, they want it to be their job, and, which is, respect 100%. Mm-hmm. For me, it was more about just giving back to the hardcore community. Right. Like, and I kind of always maintained that. And like, as far, you could split hairs, you can go down to like, photo cred and like who's tagging, you can go down that road too. And like, and like the way I see it, if Roger Merritt at his age can send me an email and be like, hey, can I use your photo? Anybody can fucking do it.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I think it like becomes this another totally crazy topic as far as like, well, even if someone is like ripping your shit, you like if your shit is good enough, people can recognize, oh, that's a Rick photo, or that's a scoped exposure set, or that's a K56 something, I do think I do give a lot of empathy to people who like are trying to, do the damn thing and try to build a career as a photographer.
Yep.
Um, I do think that, especially our sub genre of music, it's like I feel like showing up and like giving back is like a better way of trying to like build up a reputation to like maybe get a gig with a band to go do photos on a tour versus just expecting that out the
Absolutely.
gate. Cause like
Yep.
hardcore is not a genre of music that like people are making excess of money on that they can toss. So like even when people have asked about like, hey, can you come like across the world to like film this show? I'm like, that costs a lot of money for me. But like, what's the cheapest way that we can make it work? So like most times I'm like, okay, well, could you cover a flight and put me up on a couch for the weekend or whatever it is?
Yep.
But I'm not like asking people like $20 per band to film their stuff. And at the same time, like if you get to a level where it's like that is just the reality, if I don't think there's a shame in that, because again, if it gets to a different level, maybe there's other people that are of similar quality that you can reach out to that are more the up and coming people. um
Absolutely.
but yeah, I feel like I am not a fan when people come out of the gate to be like, oh, like, can you pay me, this amount and I'll shoot your band? Versus like, hey, let me just like do this for all the bands at the show.
Yep.
And then like maybe in time people will be like, or even just the bands like, hey, thanks for doing that. Here's a free shirt or $20 or whatever. And you just like scale it up. I think people just want that like initial success just way too fast.
Way too quick. I agree with you 100%. Um, especially if you're starting in like your local scene where, like you mentioned, like if you're into this kind of, hardcore and that kind of stuff, you're not in it to make a lot of money. You do it mostly for love, and that's just how it is. A lot of, new photographers coming into the game, like you said, they just want that instant kind of, thing. And it pisses some people off who just grind for the sake of grinding, just to have cool stuff to post and, that kind of stuff. And then, yeah.
Yeah, like I think it's like I've seen way more cool success stories of people that have just done it for the culture and then they get a sick opportunity. Like I'll just plug my friend Alan. You might have met Alan when he came with Endgame for those
Yeah.
two
Yeah.
shows. So he was like filming a music video for us and taking some photos. He's like, I always call Alan my creative counterpart. I feel like him and I align very much on like different ways of doing things or making content, but just like I film bands and he does music videos and all this stuff. He
Yeah.
recently like got hooked up with like the bear, like Caleb Shomo from Beartooth, and he's been
Beartooth.
traveling around the world like shooting photos and video content for them. And it was only because he was doing such great work for probably pennies for us and other bands that like it found the right person, and then now he's like making bank with Beartooth money when it comes to
Yeah.
shooting live
Yep.
shots. And I think that's just amazing, and I'm super proud of him. And I'm saying this all for like the people that are photographers, that are creatives, to like not try to like skip like the grueling years of just like doing that and like have fun doing it, because the right
Yeah.
person is going to see it and the right person is going to like bring you on and give you like some badass opportunities.
100%. Yeah. Like Alan's story is that's the story that I prefer to hear.
Yes.
Someone who, grinded just for the sake, and then, somebody noticed, and
Versus I had to convince every band to give me $50 when I give them 9 photos at a show. Like,
yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
So Rick, we've talked a lot about photos, but obviously like you play in a badass band and play some guitar. So maybe just going back to the very beginning of like Rust, because Tommy, he was on the podcast and he was mentioning like, he was like kind of the second vocalist before, you know, things started kind of going. So as far as like starting the initial beginnings of the band, can you kind of tell me that from your perspective?
Absolutely, yeah. So Russ kind of was born out of a different band. A friend of mine named Ryan Bodium. You know Ryan, I'm sure.
Yes, Ryan's a good friend.
Yeah. So Ryan had a band, a Christian metalcore band called Discover Sun,
Mhm.
and
Which I think, sorry to cut you off, was
nope,
off of Behold the City, which was before that.
correct.
Yes.
Yep.
Behold
Yep.
the City stayed at my
So
house multiple times when they were kicking.
that's cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, Discover Sun. I got to know Ryan through documenting, and I drive up to Collingwood and shoot the shows he put on, and he kind of found out that I play guitar and that kind of stuff. And their one guitar player was getting really busy and wasn't able to commit much
Mm-hmm.
at the time. And he's like, I'll take a shot at it. You know, do you want to fill in for like 3 shows? And I was like, you know what? Yeah, I could do that. I've got a guitar. You know, I'll have to borrow an amp, but I'll try. You know. And he was like, okay. He's like, I don't have any of like the tabs or anything. And I was like, I'll learn it all by ear. It's all good. He's like, you can learn by ear? And I was like, yeah, it's, you know, it's one of those things. I never took lessons for much of anything. So learned all their stuff, had to practice, and I filled in for those 3 shows. And, you know, it sparked like a massive like fire in me to be like, you know what? I want to get a band going, and, you know, I want to like take this head on.
Right.
So yeah, I filled in on those shows. And then he asked me if I wanted to join Discover Sun. And I was like, I don't know, you know, like I had a, you know, like my life was kind of turning a bit at the time, and just in regards to like work and having another kid and that kind of stuff. And then he's like, well, you know, like we'll do like a handful of shows like here and there. And I was like, okay, well that ain't too bad, but sure.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and then Discover Sun just ended up kind of fizzling out. And so from that, we decided, okay, you know, let's just put the Discover Sun thing to rest, and then let's just start something different. Something maybe more at the helm of like the way I write kind of thing. And I was like, you know, like that's a really cool idea. So that's how Rust started. Basically, we went from Discover Sun to under a different name called Rust.
Right. And
then
I guess like a key differentiator too was like when Rust was starting, you were actually the one writing. Discover Sun had someone else writing at the time, it sounds like.
Absolutely, yeah. So Discover Sun, like the other good. So Rust had 2 guitar players before. Like like I said, we transitioned from Discover Sun into Rust. That other guitar player wrote most of the Discover Sun stuff. So just like we wanted, like one thing Ryan wanted to do is he wanted to go a lot heavier. He wanted to go more hardcore based, less metalcore based. And I was like, yeah, like I'm all for that. So just naturally, I just kind of started writing and throwing riffs around. And then I came to like our first kind of practice with like the embodied riff. And then they're all like, that's so sick. And I was like, okay, cool. Let's just kind of go on that, you know, trajectory.
Sure.
And then from that, we started kind of writing, you know, toss around a few more ideas. And then the bass player that carried on from Discover Sun, he was like we noticed he kind of stopped showing up for practices. And we're like, you know, okay, you know, what's going on? He's like, I don't really like the way this is going. He's like, I don't really like, you know, like those riffs. He's like, you know,
what do you mean more like those riffs? I'm just kidding.
Right? Yeah. but yeah, you know, no, he's a sweetheart. Aaron's an awesome guy. Just naturally, like I think he wanted to stay more metalcore. Like he wanted to go August Burns Red and like those kind of bands, right?
Right.
And we were just like, nope, we're just gonna keep doing this. And then so he quit, and then we spent like the next like few months kind of like writing an EP, and then it came time to like we didn't even have a record out. We got offered a first show as Rust, and I was like, okay, shit. Like, how are we gonna pull this off? Because
Right.
we don't even have a bass player. So naturally, like I called my brother Rob, and I was like, hey, I'm in a pinch. Rust has like a first show kind of thing, and we need a fill in. And he's like, I'll fill in. And I was like, okay, cool. So let's sit down and learn these songs. And then Rob's like, why don't I just join the band? I was like, well, sure, let's have you fill in first, and let's kind of see how it goes, and because you kind of already established a bit of a relationship with other people, and the way the dynamic goes in the band and that kind of stuff.
Right.
But like, yeah, Rob filled in, and then naturally it was like, okay, you're in.
Right. Yeah, and I think the the dynamic between you and your brother Rob has always been something that's been an interesting aspect of Rust. It's just like, the string section was, the brothers. So and it sounds like, was there prior times where you were in a band with Rob, or was this kind of the initial like, okay, we're doing things together?
So Rob and I, we tried to start a band together, um, probably around like 2012, I'd say 2013. We had a friend who played in that band, Life Ruiner.
Mhm.
He played drums, and he's like, yo, let's kind of start a band. And we're like, okay. So like we got a little jam spot going, and we kind of had that going. We didn't do anything with it, obviously, but Rob and I kind of knew we wanted to be in a band together. Just straight out of that, we're like, okay, this needs to happen, like at some
Mhm.
point.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Russ ended up
So
being that avenue for him to get in.
got you. Yeah. Um, so yeah, there's some initial like, no, this is the sound of where we're going to be going. You start to you put together the lineup together, and then at some point Ryan decides to step down, and the opportunity for Tommy to step in comes to play. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So Ryan, um, Ryan was having a second kid. The one thing with Ryan, if you know him well. He's super family oriented. Like he gives it all to his wife and his kids. Like
Hmm.
his attention is there, and we hit the point where um like the balls started rolling for us kind of quickly, like right out of the gate. Kind of we started playing a lot of shows.
Hmm.
We were asked to play a lot of shows, and just kind of the ball is starting to roll super quick. And then Ryan was kind of the one pumping the brakes, being like, hey, like, we're kind of doing a bit too much. And like naturally, when you start getting a bit of momentum going, you don't want that to stop, because
Right.
you don't want to be, you know, you can't stop the ball when it's just getting rolling. Like you can't do
Right.
that.
Yeah.
So yeah. So Ryan, he was faced with having another kid, and he knew that his time was, we were probably going to get busier, and we all of us kind of hoped to be busier too.
Yeah.
And he just there's no way that he could do it. And we parted ways, like very, very, the best friends and that kind of thing. Um and then yeah, like I've known Tommy for quite a while, probably since I started taking photos. Tommy was in a band called Soul Sucker back in the day.
Right.
And so just knowing Tommy's, like the way he sings, his voice, and just kind of like the way he is on stage, and I was like, you know what, like he could be a really, really cool addition to this thing.
Mm.
And like we had played a show with World's Grasp, and I was like, yeah, I think Tommy's definitely someone who we're going to approach about this.
Hmm.
And
Yeah. To quickly jump back to Ryan, I totally know how, like, at what level he is as a family person, because he is so about his kids and just his family life, that like him and I had friendly banters about like because I don't have kids myself, but I have 2 dogs that are sleeping at my feet right now. And he's like,
Yeah.
"Oh, kids and dogs are totally different." And I'd be like, "No, it's so close." But I'm like, I'm sure I'm probably, the one talking a little out of turn about not having the experience of having kids. But yeah, like I think that is the thing where it's like you're totally right. As soon as the ball starts rolling, like you want to play to that momentum, and I think a lot of people in a number of different bands had will have moments of realization of like, oh, I don't want to be the reason that this band doesn't do or take cool opportunities, so they decide to step down. And like
Yeah.
speaking as someone in my band, it's like Endgame has had way more member changes than that I anticipated, but every single one has been like, this is just getting too big for like what
Yeah.
I initially signed up for. And I don't think there's anything wrong with
Definitely.
that. Like, every every most because we had one member change that it was like deliberately like, this person sucks and we don't like them. But every other person has been like we they're coming to our shows, we like bring them on stage to like still play a song. Like it's still part of like the quote unquote Endgame family. And I think a
Yeah.
lot of bands and people can say like, yeah, like there might be someone that, doesn't play with us anymore, but we think very fondly of their time and what they did in that project.
Definitely. Yeah. I can relate for sure. Russ is like, for some reason, Rust, like our biggest issue, I think maybe this is a big issue among many bands, is having a consistent drummer, having
Yes.
somebody who can
That's
hold that
it's
shit
yeah,
down. You
we're
know,
on the same wavelength. I think Endgame's had 4 drummers at this point.
yeah, we've had, I think Matt is our third or fourth, I think.
Mhm.
So drummers, I love you. You are needed.
It's always wild
Doing
when
your thing.
someone who plays drums in a band for like 6 bands in one city and then they move and then all those bands break up and then it's like rip.
Oh yeah,
Uh
yeah.
um yeah, but yeah, it is very vital cuz like it's just a different level of like you got to find a place to store your shit, like you're always
It's
playing
tough.
in multiple projects. Yeah, it's very tough. Like even shout out to
Even just
Grant.
lugging your shit around.
Oh yeah, totally. But yeah, shout out to Grant, who plays in my band. Yeah, he's playing in like 3 projects right now. I'm like, dude, I don't know how you do it, and I hope that you're sticking around. And I know he is, but
Yeah.
it is wild. So in time, Tommy and then Matt like kind of formed together, and now Rust is what it is.
Yeah.
And yeah, you guys have been like very, very busy, just playing a lot of different, a lot within your province, but there's, stuff happening, I'm sure, beyond that. What do you feel like is the thing? Like, we're gonna get to the new music, but like, where do you see Russ going with this lineup that has been in the mix for the last year or so?
Um,
Or
I
where do
see.
you hope
Wh-
it's going? Yeah.
So, our hope is to kind of like we're a band that like we grinded quite a lot in our own province. We kind of, I don't want to say like we have Ontario on lock, but like we're kind of we're known around Ontario quite a lot.
Mm.
Just jumping out of province, is a good start. We're looking to. Our hope is to get into Europe. Like I think we're gonna book a Europe tour and just fucking go for it. Um, you know, Obviously just playing outside of Canada, maybe even getting into Western Canada, that'd be sweet. You
Hmm.
know, Anything to kind of, branch out and get your music out there a little more, right?
Yeah. It's such a weird thing at times because it's like every band is doing so much promotion of their shit and you think that it's going out to the masses, and sometimes all it takes is like you playing in front of someone and playing in front of people that don't know you and winning them over to gain that new
Hmm.
fan. Like, I still get
100%.
people to this day that message me about us playing in Hamilton and how, like, that was one of their favorite shows of the year, or, like, you know, whatever it was. And just like, yeah, like, I definitely feel like we made arguably even more fans of the band playing that show than we even did when we played in Toronto. So yeah,
Hmm.
like, there's bands can do the whole online thing, and that is definitely a piece of just being in a band in 2022. But like, playing in front of people like that is,
It
and
rains.
and winning those people over is, you know, that can't be replicated.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like there's there's something really cool happening in Hamilton right now.
Yeah.
Like just kind of since shows came back, you know, post, I want to say, I can't say post COVID, but you know, when things start to open up a little more, um, you know, you start seeing, you know, instead of like, you know, 10, 15 kids at a show, you're seeing like 60, 70. The next one, there's 100 at a local show. And you're like, okay, this is cool. And
Right.
you're seeing younger faces, you're seeing new faces. And these are all people who, you know, I talk to people all the time who've never been to a hardcore show, and them catching, Rust and like Gavel, you know, at the Doors pub in Hamilton. Just that's what it took. And now, you know, they're starting bands, or you know what I mean?
Hmm.
Like it's a really cool thing happening. Um, like among the bands, like kind of in that scene and stuff, like there's it's very community based. Um, everybody, everyone cares about each other. You know, everyone's welcomed. You know, there's no cool guy bullshit. Um, and that's the way it should be.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, you know, we just did a podcast with Donnie from Space like earlier today. And, you know, him being so close to the border, he can dip up to St. Catharines and go to Toronto and for some of those things. And
Yep.
it is really cool, like, just how, like, you know, because Ontario, like Southern Ontario specifically, just has so many different little hubs of, you know, different little towns. And, you know, when we were coming back after doing those two shows at the end of December last year, Toronto and Hamilton, like, we were like, I think we just were so like, I think luck maybe played a part of it, because, you know, I know that we had fans and people that wanted to see us, like, you know, you guys, and but
Oh
like,
yeah, absolutely.
we got there and we're like, we are a band from literally on the other side of the country, and we have never played here before. That maybe even before COVID, or even after, still has the recipe of maybe it being disastrous and you playing to no one. And then it's like,
Yep.
oh my gosh, we came all the way here and we're paying out of pocket to get back. And we definitely left those shows with like, you know, money in our pocket, and that was like really cool to see, and just eager to get back there to like to play to those people again, and just see so many familiar faces.
Oh
um
yeah.
since we're on the topic of just Ontario things, you know, Toronto is definitely the biggest hub when it comes to you know, just music things in general. But if you wanted to pick three underrated or up and coming hardcore scenes in the Southern Ontario area, so that those could be towns or just like specific areas, what are the three that come to mind there?
What are the three that I think are kind of like the best up and coming so far?
Yes.
Um,
Or
I'd
people should
say
not skip if they're doing some routing in that area.
okay, okay. Um, Hamilton definitely number one. Um, I'd say it's interesting because each town kind of has their own like scene and like their own kind of, you know, community thing. Like Brampton's got like their own thing. You know, like Brampton is definitely one too that, um, you know, any show that I've gone to in Brampton has popped off insane.
Hmm.
Like, like you know, Kyle's thrown some incredible shows, and you know, people roll out. So Brampton for sure. I'd say Toronto. Um,
Well, let's exclude Toronto because they're their own behemoth.
it's its own thing. Yeah, it's its own entity alone for sure.
Yeah.
Um, we haven't played Ajax yet, or like that area, but apparently there's a huge thing going on there too. They got a
Ajax.
venue out
Okay.
there. Yeah, Ajax. Yeah, they got a venue out there called Roadie, like Roadielicious. It's the basement of a roadie spot.
It's called Roadylicious.
Roadielicious. Yeah, yeah. So the
My
downstairs
brain
is
is
like a little.
processing that right now.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So there's yeah. So the downstairs of that is like a DIY venue spot,
Hmm.
and yeah, like shows pop off there too. Like we haven't had a chance. We were supposed to play there kind of pre-pandemic with a thrash band from Windsor called Plague.
Okay.
We were supposed to play there with them, and then obviously all of those got canceled. But yeah, we want to get there and just kind of see what it's all about.
Got you. Okay. I like that we're kind of like doing some shout outs. So the next question I'll ask you is your favorite place to play in Ontario and your least favorite place to play.
So, I'd say my favorite place so far is definitely Kill Room.
Mm-hmm.
Kill Room, it's got its own community there. Even outside of the people we know, people just flock in there. Just it's almost guaranteed to be packed every time a show happens there.
Right.
That's just kind of like the rad thing about it. Least favorite, probably Doors Pub in Hamilton.
Doors Pub.
So, yeah. So
Okay.
Doors Pub it's not too far from Kill Room. It's like it's called the Doors Pub. It's like a taco and like metal spot. So like in the downstairs they serve tacos and they listen to like fucking Dark Throne and shit. Like it's super cool and the food's amazing. Just as far as the venue spot goes, it's like the living room of an old Victorian house.
Oh,
Yeah. So there's no ventilation at all.
great.
There's not much of sound at all. So you're basically playing live off the floor with nothing. Because there's no ventilation, it gets hot.
Right.
Like so hot, like the walls are just like dripping.
Dude, as someone that we played a show in Vancouver that had a bit of a last minute venue change, and we're playing at this place called Bully's Practice Studio. So it's just like a jam spot for people. Literally no ventilation. It's like you walk in the door, on your right is a staircase that goes up to the bathrooms, and then there's a very narrow hallway that has like, a little bar and whatever area. And then at the very end of this narrow hallway is this room that people play in. And literally it's like I've never sweated that much in my life. You know when you sweat and you literally are like every part of my body is wet right now. Like
Oh
my
yeah,
face,
yeah.
my fingertips, like I can feel it in my shoes. Like that was
Yeah.
the show. And I think by the
Oh
time
yeah.
that we had finished playing, like you could hear people walking out and it's the squishy sound of all the sweat
Oh
that's
yeah.
on the floor. Yeah, squeak,
Yeah.
squeak, squeak. So yeah, it is like it's funny. I watch little like Instagram videos that people took, and it's like I wore just like a mesh shirt and mesh shorts, but the rest of my band like halfway through the set were taking their shirts off because it was just so dripping hot.
Oh yeah, it's disgusting. And you're like, my poor guitar. Like your pickups are
Yeah, I
just
know.
like sweating, right?
Yeah, just gonna fry out. That being said, it was the best show of the tour. But it was like just. I think like leading up to it, like, oh, this is gonna suck. But when you're like in the moment, then it was totally fine.
Definitely, yeah. That's cool.
Would you rather be freezing while playing or like dripping hot sweat while playing?
Freezing, 100%.
You want to
Like,
play in like a fucking parka with the hood up?
Oh yeah, fuck yeah. Oh yeah, bring it on. Bring that shit on, yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
can't think there was ever a time where I was like, "Ooh, it's a little nippy in here." But yeah, there's definitely been times where I've like, it would be dope if I could play with a hoodie on and not be sweating.
Yeah, exactly. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know. You got like Chris from Stick to Your Guns. He rips in a hoodie all the time. It doesn't
Oh,
matter.
all the
Like
time.
all the fucking time. Like the dude's so crazy. Love it.
I remember when my good friend Dave from Shallow End, who we were on tour with, we were playing second night of tour. He like the first night he was like, "Oh my gosh, it was so hot at our Edmonton show, which we played before." And he bought a Endgame hoodie and just like put his hood up, did the fucking like just it was just like I could only see this part of his face. And he's like, my goal for this show is just to be so hot that it cools me down. I'm like, I don't know if that adds up, bro, but best of luck. But yeah, there's something to be said when you can rock, a 20 to 45-minute set. I'm thinking of Chris from Stick Your Guns because they'll have a longer set time. But to do it in a hoodie, it's like props.
Power move.
Power move for sure. Yeah, so new Rust EP coming down the pipe. What do you think is the biggest difference as far as the guitar stuff that you were doing compared to some of the older material?
So I'd say, well, if you start at the beginning and you just kind of work your way down to where we currently are, one thing that I've always loved is like crossover. I love thrash. I love that kind of that chugging, like I love that stuff. So like being able to, incorporate a bit more of it, and like we're at the point now where I think we got a pretty good balance. Like the new stuff is definitely definitely a lot of chuggies. We're doing a bit more harmonics. Like Machine Head is one of my biggest. Rob Flynn is a huge influence of mine. The harmonics, just his guitar tone, the whole vibe. So I'd say, Machine Head was definitely an inspiration on some of it. Yeah, so I'd say difference. Yeah, I'd say we're adding a bit more of that kind of stuff.
Yeah. You sent me the new EP just before we did this podcast, and now that you say Machine Head, I'm like, oh yeah, I can definitely hear aspects of that on those recordings. Russ is also a band that has been very self-sufficient in DIY when it comes to actually making the music itself. Do you want to like add anything there when it comes to like how you're actually putting the songs together, like kind of in-house?
Yeah, absolutely. So the one thing that's kind of cool is like we have, Matt, our drummer. He's a incredible producer. Having him in the band has made everything very much in-house. Which is cool. Like, when you can like put out music that has that nice crispness to it, like nice and crispy, and like that's definitely cool. And I think that it's just cool.
Yeah.
So as far as like putting songs together, like the way we generally do is I'll generally riff around at home. Like I've got like my little setup, and like I'll riff around, I'll write a few riffs, and then collectively we'll kind of build off that together. This time around we did things a little bit differently. Like I came with a couple riffs, and then we'd go to Tommy's house, and then Tommy's, he's a beast on his own when it comes to recording and, that kind of stuff. And like my biggest challenge is having someone who can, program drums kind of to the ideas that I have coming across.
Right.
Tommy's a wizard. So we'd be, we'd go to Tommy's house with a riff, and then, we'd just kind of all collectively throw the ideas around, Tommy doing the drums and, all that kind of stuff. And yeah, so we wrote most of it that way this time around. Like the intro, we had a different intro ready to go for it, but I was like, we could go way better on this. I think we could do something a little bit better. So just kind of, being with Tommy and Rob, and we just came up with this, like, I don't know. I think it's pretty rad.
Yeah, no, it like that intro specifically, I was like, there was some mean mugging moments when I was listening to it for the first time. Um, yeah, like, yeah, I'm really excited because every Rust release just seems to get better and better and better. And just
I
to see
appreciate that.
like, you know, the new, I feel like, you know, with how you got with how y'all are rolling this out, and just like even just like a new logo just felt like, oh, like shit feels like it's about to get even realer now. So
Yeah,
yeah, I'm really stoked for you guys and stoked for other people to hear this this new release. Is there anything else you want to say about the record itself before we start to head towards the end of the episode?
yeah. You know, we're going to be putting it out with Wormwood Records. Josh is such a sweetheart. One of the nicest guys I've ever met, just in general. He's someone who very much believes in what we're doing, and you know, he's very excited to help us push this release at
Mm-hmm.
the best we can. Where, you know, this will be the first thing we do where there's vinyl involved. Like, I'm a huge vinyl guy. Like, love that shit.
Mm-hmm.
So being able to like put something out on a vinyl is like, to me, it's like, I don't know, it's like setting the bar for us. You know,
Totally. You're hitting
so
a new milestone for your music endeavors, you know?
definitely, yeah, yeah. So Wormwood Records, actually, Wormwood just they're partnering up with Western Canada too right now with Claymore.
Mm-hmm.
Shout out Claymore, that's cool.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember remind me of his name who runs Forward one more time.
Josh.
Josh, yes. I remember meeting Josh at Toys for Tots because he was set up like at the table next to Endgame, and just like a genuinely like chill and like caring person. Like I love when people do anything that gives back to their local scene. You know, it doesn't need to be, sometimes I forget like Scoped is a little funky where we've just been going and doing more things, but I think it's super cool for people to like do something that is like so locally based and just like, you know, be so passionate about that. So yeah,
Yeah.
I love that for you guys, and I love that for him. And yeah, shout out to Claymore getting a little bit of love that way. Rick, we're heading towards the end of the episode. Last section is a mosh related story for you to tell before we start to wrap up. And again,
Okay.
that's anything that's first to your head. Could be at a show you were playing, just attending, you did it, it happened to you. Whatever's the first to your dome is how we start to wrap up the show.
Okay. So I'd say I've got two. I'll try and make them quick.
No,
So
take your time.
it was
Spare
at the
no
exact.
detail.
Okay. So I was at United Blood 2016, I think it was, maybe 2017, whatever the year where Integrity headlined the 1 year. So Blind Justice was playing. Shit was going crazy. They had brought like fucking like pool noodles and shit, and they're like ripping them up on stage, and it was pure chaos. And then somebody threw into the crowd like a crutch. Like when someone has a broken leg, they walk around with a crutch. I saw a crutch just go flying in the crowd, and it hit somebody, and it hit someone, and they went fucking down. Like they went
Oh,
down almost
no.
immediately. So I was like, "Holy shit!" And I was like, "I hope they're okay." And then, you know, I
They
went
could use
outside
that
after
crutch
this,
if they need it once they come to.
right? Yeah. So I go outside, and then I find out that it's actually a friend of mine.
Oh no.
Yeah, a friend of mine caught it in the face,
Damn.
and it took them out. Yeah, that was pretty wild.
Yeah.
And then I guess the other thing was, so I was at United Blood documenting, so I was taking photos, and so Integrity comes on, and I'm like, holy shit, I get to shoot Integrity. Like, this is crazy. Because
Yeah.
Integrity is one of my favorite bands ever. And so I'm standing in, I don't know if you've ever been to, can't remember what the spot's called in Richmond, like where United Blood is generally done. But there's two massive pillars on each side of the stage. So
Yeah,
I was
I've
on,
seen the videos, so I have a rough
Okay.
sense of the layout. Yeah.
okay, so I was on the one side, and like the side where Dom, the guitar player, is playing,
Yeah.
and so I'm shooting them and all that good stuff, and then Dom comes over, and he's like, "Yo," he's like, "You got to go." He's like, "I'm gonna freak a solo here," and I was like, "What?" So yeah, and I just like fly off the fucking side, like kind of like half stage dive like with a camera. It's pretty funny.
Stage dive with the camera.
Yeah, and he was just there like soloing like the whole time.
That's so funny.
Yeah, it was amazing.
Yeah, it's always it's funny. You saying stage dive with the camera reminds me of when I've seen Cole, who we mentioned earlier. Like sometimes he'll just do like a side to side with his camera. Like he'll just like doing that, and just like it's so hilarious to see people do anything mosh related with super expensive anything in their hands.
Oh yeah, you're risking
You know.
everything, man. Like
Yeah, you could be moshing with a camera or moshing with a Nintendo Switch. To me, it has the same effect. Rick, this has been such a fun chat. Obviously, like, you know, big fan of you and your band, and I just feel like
likewise, man.
Rust specifically has been a band where I have felt the love on the scope side of things, and it hasn't felt disingenuous. You know, there's definitely like certain times where I can really feel like certain people are doing that just so they get a bit more like attention from me for like a plug or anything, but it's never
Oh yeah, I can see that
felt
for
that
sure.
way with you guys. It's always been like, you know, friendship first and just like a genuine respect for anything that I've done that either benefits your band or not. So I really appreciate that, and I really appreciate, you know, us being friends and being able to do that.
Likewise, man. Likewise.
All your links and the band links will be in the description and in the show notes. But if there's anyone you want to shout out, anything you want to plug, or anything you want to send the people off with, the floor is yours.
You know what? I'm gonna shout out. I'm gonna shout out a few different bands in our area who are just absolutely killing it, and I'm excited for everything they're doing. Gavel's one of them. Gavel from Hamilton, they're incredible. I'm gonna shout out Trauma Model from Kingston. They're all such awesome friends of mine, and they're gonna do some really cool things. Shout out to Cinco and Constraint. That band's awesome. Shout out to a few different photographers in our area who are absolutely killing it too. Omar, always. David Praff, who's actually going to be, he's doing like kind of most of our stuff these days.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
We're hoping to keep him with us forever because he's amazing. And another photographer, MG. MG is insane. Very similar style to mine. Yeah, very similar style to mine, especially in like some recent stuff I've seen. I'm like, okay, that's cool.
Yeah. I think both Dave and MG were at the Hamilton show, right?
Yep, absolutely.
And Omar. So just
Omar.
The Trinity is as far as I'm concerned of Southern Ontario photographers.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, again, Rick, great chatting with you. For the listeners, Rust and the Alberta homies in Plead are doing a little run together. So I'm gonna probably drop this episode just before that shit gets going. So do you want to plug any of the dates when it comes to
Absolutely. That? Yep. So yeah, Rust, D Block, Plead. It's gonna be a hard 4 nights. So we're still it's gonna be wild. You know, we're starting off in London with D Block. Can't make that one, but we're going to start off in London with Plead. We got that's August 4th. We got Rust, Plead, Cohesion, and Bar Down. Insane lineup. And then we got Windsor on the 5th with D Block is on that one. And then we got Plead, Rust, and then we got Reliever. Incredible band. Such talented human beings. And then we got Toronto on the 6th, and that's going to be a fun one. We get to rip with a band called Temper Tantrum, and that band's just killing it right now. And a band called Just Right. It's their first show, so that'll be sick to watch. I love that band. And then yeah, we finish it off in Hamilton. That's kind of I think there's 6 bands on that bill. You know, we got D Block, Rust, Plead, a new band called Living Nightmare. We got Hostage, and then we got the Homies and Die Alone on that one.
Yeah. Tons of killer bands. Highly recommend anyone who's a little, unfamiliar with the Ontario scene to check out all those bands that Rick had mentioned. Rick, I'm really grateful for your time and being flexible with when we started all this shit.
Yeah,
And
likewise, man.
I'm excited to see you in a couple months or a month or so.
Yeah.
Time is
Yeah,
just
you're rolling.
flying, man. So
Oh, I know. September's right around the corner, buddy.
yeah, which is both exciting and stressful. But all that being said, thank you again for just being a real one and just a genuine human being. And thanks again for coming on the podcast.
Absolutely, buddy. Thank you so much.